masterclass is going to be channel libraries and presets. So we're going to talk about what those are and how to use them on each of our consoles. And some of it's very straightforward, and some contexts for presets you might not necessarily know already. So you might be able to discover some kind of interesting tips and tricks that you weren't already aware of, and that could save you some time at your next installation or your next performance or whatever you're doing. So let's get right into it. First of all, what is a library? In this context, it's not a big building full of books. It's more of a way to store and recall specific settings for individual processing blocks. So that could be the compressor, EQ, or gate, or whatever. It could be used for your effects racks, or it can be used for an entire channel. You can actually have an entire channel library. So if you want to kind of, if you're working with the same musician, but sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not, you can recall their entire channel strip, including the preamp, if you store the channel library properly. So that's a useful feature, and we're going to go through how to do that with each of our consoles. And you can actually take library data. Sometimes it's stored within a show, but you could take a library from a show out and put it into another show. So it's not confined to a single show file. So that's kind of unique as well. If you're working with the same musician, but on in different contexts, in different show files, but their channel strip stays the same, you can take a channel strip from one show file and move it to another. Or if you have a particular EQ setting you like, you could take that from one show, move it to another, take it from one console, move it to another. And there are two main types of libraries. There are factory libraries. These are the ones that come pre-made from Allen and Heath. And I'll emphasize that they're mainly just starting points. Like, you're never going to have a preset that you just bring up and, okay, that's it. That's your EQ, and you don't have to touch it anymore. Obviously, there's always variations in the type of mic you're using, or how far the mic is from the source, and all kinds of different factors that can change your requirements for EQing. So these are just kind of starting points. It'll kind of set the frequencies in the right place, and then you'll have to adjust the gains, of course, to kind of set it more for your specific context. And then in addition to factory libraries, there are user libraries that you could save yourself. If you have a particular EQ setting or compressor setting that you want to keep reusing, you could store that and then recall it whenever you need it on other channels. So let's start with Q series. We're going to start with Q and work our way up to D-Live and AHM. So first of all, on Q series, when you open a compatible processing screen, so in this case, in the top left, you could see we're on the parametric EQ. And this function button just above it, you'll see the library option. So when you're on a compatible screen with libraries, you'll see that library will show up above the function key. And so if you use your tiny hand to press the function button, that will bring up this library menu. And so here's what it looks like. On Q series, this is a PEQ library, so this is specific to the PEQ. And this is channel libraries. They're kind of grouped together on Q series. So this, if you brought up one of these, it would just bring up the specific EQ settings. Whereas if you brought one of these up, it would change the whole channel, including the compressor and the gate. And you can also recall the preamp as an option. And any with a green icon, those are user presets that you've saved. And any with red, those are presets made by Allen and Heath that are preloaded on the console, or that with the Pro Factory mic presets that we'll get into later. And any of these presets, if you go to the USB data and library screen, you can transfer these to USB drive and bring them to another Q console and load them up, and they'll be cross-compatible. So that's pretty useful. You can have up to 128 total libraries. I can't imagine somebody using up all those slots, but if you wanted to, you can. You have 128 slots available. Next is SQ, and it gets a bit more complex here, and you have a bit more options. So when you open the processing screen on SQ, this is what the screen looks like. You have kind of your bank view, and this is the channel that's currently selected. It'll be highlighted in green. And when you're just on this initial view where you see the entire channel strip, and you press the library key, which is to the left of the screen, that will bring up a channel library, because you're not focused in on any particular processing block. You're on the entire channel. And so when you press library in this context, you'll get channel libraries where you can, this is what the screen looks like. So you can bring up presets or make your own. And you see that here, as opposed to Q, you actually have the option of recalling the preamp and the name and the color of the channel. On Q, you don't have those scribble strips the same way you do in SQ. So in this case, you have the option of recalling the name and color of the channel as well, which is pretty useful. If you focus in on any particular block, so if I were to tap on the parametric EQ and then press library, then I'm accessing my EQ library specifically, and same with compressor and gates and whatever it is. So it depends what you're focused on. The library button will change depending on the context that's on the screen. And same as with Q, you can copy your libraries to USB, transfer them to another SQ console, and they will be cross-compatible. So that's useful as well. This is another feature that's unique to SQ. You don't have this on Q. These are input patch libraries. So you might not have known this, but if you're on the IO screen on an SQ and you're on the inputs tab specifically, you can press the library button and there are some input channel patch libraries. So if you wanted to quickly set up, let's say you brought an SQ to a new venue and all of your inputs were by default set to local. But now you want to change all of your input sources to be from a stage box that's connected to the S-Link port. If you open up the input channel library and then select S-Link, this is a factory library, it will overwrite all of your input sources to now be from S-Link. So you can just quickly swap between local or S-Link or USB inputs or IO port. And you can also make user presets for your input patches. So if you work in a few different venues and the only thing that changes between those venues is the input patch or the input source of each of your channels, you can have user libraries that you recall depending on which venue you're in, and that will overwrite your input sources to match what you need. So that's a really unique feature that I feel like a lot of people don't really know about, but that library button can work on the IO screen on SQ to overwrite your input patches. So really useful stuff. Next, let's look at Avantis. So to access channel libraries on Avantis for an entire channel strip, you'd first just tap on the naming block where you change the name of the channel, and this keyboard will pop up. And at the bottom of the keyboard, you'll see channel library as an option. And so you can have, stored, full input channel libraries that you can recall, and you have the option of recalling the preamp. There's no option for name and color yet. I think that's something that's currently being worked on. And then if you go to a particular processing block like the EQ or the gate or whatever, those will have their own on-screen library buttons to bring up those channel libraries. And again, you can, of course, make your own or recall the factory ones. And on Avantis, if you have the DPAC or if you've unlocked any of the free plugins, this is how you would open them. So if you wanted to use like one of the compressor models, you'd go to the compressor, open the library, and that's where they'll show up. And same with the source expander or the dual threshold expander, those will replace your gate. So if you open the gate libraries, that's how you access those, is opening the library function. So that's where library really comes in handy, is when you're trying to access those deep plugins that you've unlocked with the DPAC on Avantis. Next is DLive, so very similar stuff. I know it's getting kind of repetitive, but it's important to know because each console has its own little quirks to it. So on DLive, if you open the processing screen, or if you're on a dual screen DLive like an S5 or an S7000, the left screen will be where all your processing is. But if you're on a single screen one, it's by just pressing the processing key next to your only screen. And at the top, you'll see different tabs for each section of processing. So if you open the overview section, that's kind of the equivalent of SQ of seeing like the overview of the channel and all of its processing. And on that screen, if you press library, that's to access channel libraries. So you could store your own channel libraries, or you can bring some over from somebody else, or templates or whatever it is. And then if you zoom in on any particular processing block, same deal as with Avantis, you could open the specific library for that block. So PEQ libraries or compressor libraries or gates or whatever it is. And same thing with those deep plugins. That's how you access them on DLive, is by opening the library on the appropriate processing block. And on DLive, remember we talked about IO libraries on SQ. On DLive, you have that as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's even more sophisticated than the SQ IO libraries. So you can actually have input patch libraries, you can have output patch libraries, and you can also have your insert patch libraries. So if sometimes you're using like Waves plugins and sometimes you're not, you can use libraries to quickly swap back and forth between having your inserts patched or having them not patched, or having the order of the inserts patched differently. You can use input patch libraries to quickly do that. You can also use scenes to do that, but this is kind of a way to not have to go through all the process of filtering out other things from being recalled when you're recalling a scene. So you know that you're only recalling either the input patch, the output patch, the insert, or all three of those. And you have recall options here that you can adjust it. Yeah. Okay. So now lastly, AHM. So this is Samantha's favorite. So if you open the channel screen and then inputs, you can tap on like where you do the channel naming and hit library in the bottom, and that's to do a full input channel library. And again, you can focus in on a particular processing block. I don't know why you'd want to save this EQ because it looks insane, but you could theoretically save this if you wanted to kind of prank someone. Just call it like really good EQ, and then they'll recall it accidentally, and it will ruin their whole mix. So yeah, you could save these libraries on particular processing blocks, and those will be specific to those. Sorry, just reading through some questions here. Yeah, SQ, you could, so Sean had a question whether you can use those input patch libraries to do a virtual sound check, and you can do that. That's a great idea, because that's essentially what virtual sound check does, is it overwrites the input source of all your channels. So if you're playing back from Dante or over USB, and you want those to be the sources of your channels because you don't actually have the performers there, you can quickly use input patch bay to swap back and forth between having the source from a multi-track that you've recorded, or be the live source with the performers actually there. So you can use the multi-track, play it through the system, adjust all your levels, and do your sound check. And then when the performers are actually there, recall the actual input patch of the live performers. So that's a great point, Sean. Next thing, say Watson. No, there are no output libraries on SQ. If there's enough demand for that, I'm sure that's something they could do, but for now it's only input patches. So Pro Factory mic presets. This is something that came out a few years ago. Allen Heath worked with a few different mic partners, mic manufacturers, to kind of make EQs that were tailored to specific types of microphones. So if you're using like a Beta 52 or an SM58 or something, most of us may have worked with those already, and we know what to EQ those. But if you want a good starting point to work with these common mics, you could load up these factory presets. Some consoles come preloaded with them, depending on when you purchased it. But if you don't see those available in your EQ libraries on your Q or SQ or Avantis console, you can manually load those up by just putting them onto a USB drive and then transferring them to your console. And then it'll show up under USB libraries, and you could transfer it over. And you can access those through this URL on the website. For SQ and Avantis, I think it's just Audix for now. But if there's more demand for other brands, then those can be added in. But for Q, there's a lot of different manufacturers. So if you're just kind of starting off with mixing and you want some EQ ideas for these common mic types, a lot of these will be kind of pretty useful for that. And also, you'll notice that when you recall certain Pro Factory mic presets, the EQ is just going to show as flat. But what's really changed is the frequency bands and where they're located, because the gain adjustment is more what you'll have to manually change, whereas the actual positioning of the frequency is kind of tailored to the frequency response of that specific mic. So that's something to note. If you recall a Pro Factory mic preset and it looks flat, it's not that nothing recalled, it's that the frequencies have changed, not the gains. Finally, let's look at effects libraries. So this, I'm showing a DLive in this screenshot, but really effects libraries work the same on all of our consoles. So if you'd open like the effects screen on an SQ or a Q or Avantis or a DLive, and then you select a particular effects rack, you use the library function. That's where you actually choose which effect is in that effects rack. So if you wanted to change effects rack 1 to be from a reverb instead to be a chorus or a flanger or phaser, whatever it is, you'd open the library button. The first column here is going to be the type of effect, and then the second column is a preset. So there's not pro presets. I guess there are pro presets, but there are factory presets for each of these types of effects. But you can also store user presets if you have a particular reverb setting that you really like and you want to keep recalling that in other show files. You can store your presets. Just hit store or overwrite or whatever it is, and it will keep it here, so you can always access it again if you want to bring up that particular reverb or whatever it is effect setting that you really like. And let's talk about copy, paste, and reset. So sometimes you want to copy settings over quickly between channels, but you don't really want to bother with libraries and saving it and recalling it. If you want to just quickly bring over settings from one channel to another, you can hold all of our main digital consoles have this. I think AHM has it as well. Samantha can confirm. But all of our consoles have these copy, paste, reset buttons, and I really can't stress the importance of, I can't overstress the importance of these buttons, because you can use them to, say, copy just an EQ. If you go to the EQ and hold copy, tap the EQ, and then hold paste, you could paste it on as many EQs as you want and bring those settings over. If you hold copy, you can also just press the select key on a channel, and that will copy all of the processing on that channel, and then hold paste and press select on other channels, and you're quickly just copying over the processing from that first channel over to all these other ones very quickly. And then what you might not be aware of is that you can use the copy and the mix buttons. So if you're working on like an Avantis or a DLive, you can hold copy and then press the mix button on an input channel, and that copies all of the mix assignments and routing for that input channel. So if you wanted to, say, take one input channel and then copy its routing over to other channels, you hold copy and press mix on the input channel you want to take it from, then hold paste and press mix on all the other channels you want to apply it to, and that will paste over all the routing. So that's a really quick way to give the same routing and mix assignments to multiple channels. And you can also do it in reverse. So if you want to take like an aux mix that has all these particular channels assigned to it, and then use that as a foundation for building off your other aux mixes, you could hold copy and press mix on an aux master, and then hold paste and press mix on a bunch of other aux masters, and that will give you the same aux mix on multiple auxes. And then you can use that as a starting point to build further monitor mixes off of that first one. So that's a really useful feature. Don't just use copy and paste for EQs and compressors. Use it for your routing too, and use it for entire channel strips if you need to. Sorry, there's some questions that came in. So Gary wants to know on SQ, how do you share presets from one show to another show? Well, what I would suggest doing is copy it to a USB drive. So have a USB drive in your console, copy the preset, the library to USB, and then when you recall your other show, it'll still be on that USB drive, so you could just bring it back over. So SQ only has kind of one show on it at a time. It's not like DLive and Avantis where you can cycle through multiple shows. So yeah, you probably need a USB drive in order to transfer from one show to another. Keep that in mind. Yeah, Douglas, for Avantis and SQ, it's just Audix mics for now. But if you want other Pro Factory mic presets for Avantis or SQ, I suggest maybe posting about it in the forums, because they're kind of monitoring demand for that. If there's no demand for these other mics, then they won't do the work for it. So if you are interested in getting presets for like Shure mics or Sennheiser, whatever it is, just let us know, and they'll definitely put in the work to do that. Demo time. So I just wanted to do a quick demo, just showing everything we looked at today. So boom. Can you all see my director? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay. So so yeah, let's say I want to do an EQ. So let's select input 13. So we got it selected. And so here's the processing screen. So if I go to the overview tab and I hit library, so here's an entire channel library. So I could store this, I can give it a name, call it Bob, apply. So now my Bob channel library is saved, and this is all the processing on that channel. But if I want to just store a particular one, like I just want to store the gate, for example, hit library, hit store new, and now I could store Bob's gate. Boom. Now Bob's gate is stored, and I could bring that up on other channels or in other show files or whatever it is. And like I said, here's the source expander and the dual threshold expander that are available on DLive and Avantis with the DPAC. So if you wanted to make use of those deep plugins, it's all about using the library function on the appropriate screen. And I also just wanted to show you the copy and paste. So on Director, it's latching, but on the actual console itself, you'll have to hold down the button. So if I press copy, see, I can copy individual settings on the screen, or I could just press select on a channel, and you see on the screen it says copied channel. So it copied all that channel processing, and I could then press paste, and I could paste that channel processing onto multiple channels, and you see it says pasted channel over here. So you could easily transfer settings from one channel to another. Douglas, I think there are already presets for basic instruments voices. So just check the library for on your SQ, just go into the EQ library, whatever it is. And I think there should be already presets for those, not for specific mics, but for specific types of input sources. Okay, so Alex wants to know, can library recall be triggered by scene automation recalls? Well, that would be redundant because the scene itself can already recall the processing settings of a particular channel. So you don't necessarily need to recall a specific library at the time by recalling a scene, because the scene itself already contains that information. So you could obviously recall settings with scenes, but you don't really need to recall a library as well because the settings are already there. Are there any other questions? Because that basically terminates everything I have prepared for today. Anyway, lots of great questions today. Anything else? Let's see, just scrolling up in case I missed something. Okay, Samantha confirmed that HM does have copy to and copy from. Basic, I don't know that there are presets on Avantis. I'd have to verify that for you, Douglas. I'll have to follow up with you regarding that. Yes, Andrew, you can export presets to a PC or USB. All of our consoles can do that. Just go to like the USB data section and you'll see an option for libraries, and any of your user libraries will show up on the console and you could just transfer them to a USB drive. Tips on labeling your stored presets for an easy recall. Well, I would just, that really depends on you, Les. It depends on what's most convenient for you. Like I would want to label them in a way that I recognize what they're for. So you might not want to call them Bob unless you're actually using it on a performer named Bob. So yeah, just label it in a way that makes sense to you. It should on certain consoles. I don't know if all the consoles do this, but certain ones will say whether it's what type of preset it is, if it's an EQ or compressor, or if it's a channel library. But on other consoles, you might have to manually put like it's Bob's EQ or Bob's compressor, just so that it's always visible what type of preset you're using. Cool. Yes, Alberto, you can save your show files to USB and use it later, but you can't use a show file from a queue on a USB. Sorry, a queue on an SQ. The shows are not cross-compatible between the series. There's just too much difference in the underlying kind of how they're built. So you can use SQ shows on any other model of SQ. So an SQ5 can work on an SQ6 and an SQ7, and same with Q. They could work across different models of Q, but it won't work between different series. Brian, no, I'm afraid not. You can't copy between SQ, DLive, and Avantis. That could be a useful feature though. Like if there's enough demand for that, again, there could be the possibility of Allen Heath creating some kind of translation between the different libraries. But as of right now, it's kind of limited to the specific series that you're working in. Cool. Yeah. No problem, guys. If there's any other questions, I'm going to hang around. But yeah, I really appreciate all of you joining in, and don't forget to fill in that survey. Yeah, I agree, Douglas. It would be great. I think even most advanced engineers might not have worked on, like, maybe I've been working for 10 years in audio engineering, but I've never worked on a trumpet before, an accordion, and I want to know like what's a good preset for that. So I don't think it's a matter of saying like, hey, you should know this. It's just a matter of like probably there wasn't enough demand for it yet. But if just make your voice heard, definitely post about it in the forums, and I'll pass on any comments you guys have to the UK folks. But yeah, it's also a matter of saying like, yeah, like Samantha said, sometimes presets can be kind of a crutch, and it might limit the actual resulting sound because the preset itself needs further adjustment to really get the appropriate sound that you're looking for. Can you cascade on a single show? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Asham. Like have the same show file contain data for all those consoles? Oh, no, I'm afraid not. Yeah, the show files are pretty separate, and the procedure for storing them and recalling them is a bit separate. So yeah, it's a bit complicated for them to set that up, and I don't know that there's been enough demand for them to actually put in the work to create that sort of thing. But yeah, like I said, make your voice heard in the forums. Allen and Heath always listens to customer feedback. So if that's something that you do, if you're like a rental house and you're using the same like the same kind of rotation of different series of consoles, and you want to use the same show file, that's certainly something